Switch a moment to the question of the Iran sanctions, and first off, congratulate you on the recent this morning's designation of an additional batch of these. However, it seems to me that the rate at which these have been coming out is sort of erratic. In the 6 weeks prior to the Iranian elections in June, the Treasury Department issued 7 notices of designations of sanction violators that included more than 100 new people, companies, aircraft, and sea vessels. Since the June 14th, when Rouhani was elected, the Treasury Department issued only 2 designation notices that identified only 6 people and 4 companies as violating the sanctions, and now we have a new batch for which I commend you. And so my question was, to what do you attribute this sort of erratic, batch by batch nature of the designations? Just start with that.
Congressman, the work of enforcing sanctions is painstaking work that we have an extraordinarily talented team at Treasury working on. They're dedicated to it, they're committed to it, and they make progress at the pace that they make progress. I think the designations today reflect the fine work that they've done and the determination that we have to be true to what I said in my opening remarks and what I've said over and over again, that we will continue to investigate for violations of sanctions and take action where we find them. That it is important to the sanctions being effective that they be implemented.
Yeah. Now, in light of this 6-month freeze and negotiating window, many people, including myself, have the concern that companies will say, "Oh boy, the sanctions are going to go away in 6 months," and that you'll see massive cheating on the sanctions for companies that are trying to gain a commercial advantage with, anticipating the easing of the sanctions. And I was wondering, do you feel like you have all of the authority you need to make sure that any company that is caught cheating on the sanctions gains no commercial advantage from that?
Congressman, enforcement is the answer, and I have said in every meeting I've had with CEOs since the interim agreement that there should be no uncertainty. We are continuing to enforce sanctions. No one should think that having Iran on a bill of lading or on a financial record is going to go unnoticed, that we are going to stay on this, and that this is not an opening up of any door to relaxing our core financial, banking, and oil sanctions. I said it in a public speech again last night. I've probably talked to several hundred CEOs in one group or another and delivered the message personally. So I don't know how to be more clear than that. It's not like we have some other mechanism other than enforcement, but we're very clear that any CEO, any business that steps into a space that violates sanctions is doing it at the risk of having an enforcement action.
Yeah, but do you anticipate, for example, that a company that is caught, cheating on this will have sanctions that extend past the time that normal sanctions would be released?
So, Congressman, the duration of sanctions is something that's a technical matter that, depending on the violation and the provision, so rather than give you an off-the-cuff answer, I would rather follow up and do it on a more detailed basis based on which provision you're referring to.
Okay. So I'd like to change for a moment to a couple things that relate to your position on FSOC and some important issues there. One is the application of basically banking capital standards to insurance companies, and I wonder if you have any reaction on to the appropriateness of that.
Well, to be clear, the only actions taken at FSOC regarding insurance companies were to designate the institutions that met the standard of financial presenting that degree of financial risk. The question of how they're regulated is something that each of the regulators will now be dealing with. They've made it clear that they're looking at how to do this in a way that works. The charge under FSOC is not to implement, it's to make the determination as to whether or not there's that kind of systemic risk. And then the tools of each of the regulators will be used as appropriate. But as I tried to indicate in my response to Congressman Neugebauer, we understand that banks and insurance companies are not identical.
Mm-hmm. And another issue related to this in the few seconds left is the issue of collateralized loan obligations and risk retention. Which is, obviously CLOs were not involved in our financial collapse, and the specter of risk retention is something that is, makes a lot of people uncomfortable. And I was wondering if you have a reaction to that.
Look, I think in general, the idea that firms should internalize their risks is a very important principle. There are many ways to achieve that, and we've tried, as we've laid out our actions in response to financial reform, to make it clear. The test is, are firms putting themselves at risk rather than taxpayers at risk for the business decisions that they're making? And capital is part of it, and restrictions like some of the things in the Volcker Rule are part of it, and leverage as well.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The chair now recognizes